Welcome to this session on protecting rural consumers. In this session, we will discuss the nature and characteristics of rural consumers, the reasons for growth of rural markets, the problems faced by consumers, and what strategies are needed to protect the rural consumers. Let us understand the rural consumer base in India. As we all know, India lives in villages. India's 70% population still lives in villages, that is the rural areas. Rural India has a large consuming class, and as we know that 70% of the population lives there, it has a huge middle class also, and 58% of the total disposable income still comes from the rural areas. We should also understand that nearly 40% of all those graduates from colleges are the rural youth. They come from the rural areas. Therefore, their aspirations are much different than what they were earlier of the rural people. With literacy and economic prosperity rising in the rural areas, the aspiration for a better quality of life has forced rural people to look for better services, better products that are available in the market. Let us analyze the characteristics of rural consumers. As we all know, illiteracy and ignorance is the most important characteristic still in our rural areas. They also have low purchasing powers, and therefore they buy in small quantities, and they also prefer to buy loose products because they cannot afford the packed commodities. Therefore, they have a limited choice, and we all know that one of the major impediments is of limited choice that is available, especially in the rural markets. Now, what happens? Availability of this is more dependent upon the quality rather than the product that which is available. And it also is seen that not too many brands are available, therefore, the rural population is not essentially brand conscious. Now, we see that the rural markets are growing in leap and bounds. Now, there are various factors because of which rural markets are growing. One of the important factors is globalization and economic liberalization that has taken place, because of which the markets have opened up, better products are there, better services are there, and therefore, the rural markets are also growing along with the urban markets. The other important thing is there is rise in disposable income of rural families because of large number of government schemes being run in the rural areas. A different kind of employment generation is there. Therefore, some disposable income is there with the rural families, and therefore, they have a rising disposable income to spend more on better quality of life. Rural population is involved in business other than agriculture. Now, we all know that if you go to the rural areas, you find small shops all along the roads. That is, the rural population is now more involved in business other than agriculture. There is also increase in white collar jobs in the towns. People come from the rural areas, work in the cities, and go back to the towns, and therefore, you have a lot of people migrating from villages to the towns and back to the village. So, they have the money which is needed to buy things and product. The other most important factor is media penetration in the rural areas. So, people are aware of what are the products, what are the services that are being provided, and therefore, it is much easier for them to buy things and products because they have the information and awareness about it. The other important is women empowerment is taking place in the rural. So, therefore, fast moving consumer goods, beauty products, these are some of the ones which are moving faster in the rural areas because women are demanding, because more of them are being educated, more of them are going into jobs, more of them are going for employment. Along with that is the infrastructure improvement that is taking in the villages. As we know that government has been spending huge sums of money on the infrastructure building in the rural areas. You have better connectivity, you have roads, you have electricity, you have other infrastructure, because of which it's easier for the products to reach at the end of the market, and also because of infrastructure development, there is a prosperity that is taking place in the rural areas. The other most important is rising aspirations of the rural population, as I said earlier, because of economic prosperity, better education, globalization, access to information, There is an aspirational India that we are looking at, and that is more in the rural, because they are looking at the urban and saying that this is the quality of life that they all desire to have, and that is inspiring these people to buy better things, better products, look for quality life, and that is why there is a growth of rural markets in the India. If any state you go across, you will find that the rural markets are also changing in terms of products and services. But because of the reasons cited earlier, a large number of exploitation of the rural consumers, and they face a number of problems in the rural areas. Now, most important, let us see, there is widespread menace of spurious products in rural markets. It is easy to deceive the rural consumers. You have large number of fake and spurious products that are available. Fake and lookalike locals dominate the market in rural areas, where the retailers prefer high margin local brands. Malpractices are much high. You have higher prices than MRP, faulty weights and measures, defective goods that do not conform to ISI norms, goods that really do not meet the standards that are prescribed. So, you have large such malpractices that are prevalent in the rural markets. The other important is limited access to alternatives and lack of information about possible choices. So, they are forced to buy whatever is available. The other important thing is, you see that there are large number of consumer schemes available in the urban areas, but in the rural markets you do not really get the consumer schemes, and they are not passed on to the consumer even if they are available. So, sometimes you also find that buy one get one is never given, but even the second one is sold away to the consumer because he is not aware that he is entitled to get a free one. Apart from products, you have large number of deficiencies in services like medical, banking, insurance, electricity. So, large number of services that are given, there are no standards, because the rural consumers are not aware of how do they avail these facilities, where do they complain, and how do they meet the standards that are prescribed. Service providers are also not held accountable for the poor services they are providing. So, that is one reason, because the consumers are ignorant, not aware about the standards, not aware about the quality. Therefore, service providers are not accountable in the rural areas. We have also talked about misleading advertisements, and there is no regulation. So, if you look at the newspapers, in the early newspapers, especially the vernacular newspapers, if you look page 2 and 3, you find large number of such advertisements which really have no basis. Lack of education and awareness about consumer rights is also one of the major problems being faced by the rural consumers. Therefore, exploitation becomes much easier. Lack of information, knowledge about redressal mechanism is not there, because they do not know where to they file a complaint. In fact, many of them are not even aware there is a Consumer Protection Act to protect their interests. It provides for 6 rights, and they are not aware that there is a district forum where they can go and file a complaint. So, essentially lack of information and knowledge about the redressal mechanism has aggravated the crisis in the rural areas. So, essentially we have seen that consumers face a number of problems in the rural areas. There is no mechanism for hand-holding to redress their grievances. As consumer base is too large and diverse, government cannot do everything alone. Therefore, building partnership with NGOs, VCOs will help reach rural consumers. Now, how NGOs can play an important role in protecting the rural consumers? The most is by identifying and giving coherent expression to the consumer problems that are being faced in the rural areas. Advising the consumers, how do you buy, how do you avail a service, what are your rights, what are your interests, and how do you protect your interests. So, essentially advising them to empower the consumers. In respecting the consumer interest, the NGO groups can play a major role, because they know how do they realize the consumer's interest and what is the best advice that they can give, what is the material that they can give, what is the medium that they can adopt to empower the consumers. Informing and educating consumer therefore becomes one of the major aspects in empowering the consumer, and it is here where the consumer organization can play a major role. They are capable of inspiring the confidence and trust of consumers because they are local based, they know each other, they operate in a very specific localized area. So, therefore, there is more confidence in them, and consumers do ensure that they have the support from the NGOs. They are also authoritative independent sources of consumer advice information because they are not biased, they are neutral, they do not go with any governmental policies, but they give them the best information and advice that is needed. Therefore, the NGOs can play a major role in empowering consumers, especially the rural consumers, so that the rural consumer is aware, he is motivated, he is inspired, he is educated, and he understands what are his consumer rights. Looking at the overall scenario of consumer protection in the rural areas, there are certain strategies that need to be adopted to protect the rural consumers. The most important is create awareness about consumer rights and obligations, which is the fundamental to empower the consumers. Promote consumer education through schools, colleges, the panchayats and other institutions, so that the consumer education becomes a focus for all. Involve the panchayats, NGOs and the media. The best instrument of creating an awareness is to involve the panchayats. The panchayats can also monitor the shops and other things that are in the area. The other important thing is we have large number of officials and officers both at the local level and at the other state capitals. So, building the capacity of the local officials, and that can be done through the State Institute of Rural Development. So, therefore, we also need to formulate specific policies for the rural consumers, particularly farmers, women and children. You should understand that Indian consumers are not homogeneous, they are a heterogeneous group. Therefore, every group needs to have its own policies and programs. Therefore, strengthening the consumer redressal mechanism at the district level will go a long way, where you can have the circuit benches moving up to the block level, so that access to justice is much faster, quicker, and the rural consumer can have the confidence to come and file his complaint. So, essentially this is what we are talking about, how do you empower and protect the rural consumers. Thank you.